Welcome to the ESI 101 webinar. I would now like to turn the call over to your speaker today, Gregory Schodde, partner in the law firm of McAndrews Held and Malloy.
Welcome to ESI 101. My name is Greg Schodde. I am a partner at the McAndrews law firm in Chicago. A little bit about my background. I've been doing patent litigation for the last 20 years. Before I went into law, I got an electrical engineering degree, and I was a systems analyst at Procter & Gamble in their information technologies department. Also, while I was in school, the business school didn't have enough professors who knew enough about personal computers to teach the introductory computer class, so I also taught for 2 years the Introduction to Computers class for the undergraduate business school. So, over the last 20 years, I've had a good opportunity to see the changes in electronically stored information and how computers have been changing our practice. A little bit about the goals for this program. The motivation for this webinar event was in response to some of our prior 7th Circuit pilot project webinars. We received questions from our audience that show that a lot of our practitioners in the 7th Circuit were fundamentally in need of some basic ESI concepts, including things as basic as what is ESI. And so with that in mind, we've tried to put together a program that will introduce some basic ESI concepts and vocabulary for the ESI novice. So this program is directed to that person, the person who is just moving from the paper world into the world of ESI and needs some basic concepts and vocabulary to get started. A few disclaimers for this program. It's for educational use only. We have no claim to copyright in U.S. government materials. The opinions and views in this program are mine and mine alone. They do not reflect the position of the McAndrews firm or of the 7th Circuit. This presentation does not constitute legal advice. Specific circumstances will vary, and any particular comment on any given situation in this program should not be considered applicable to any specific situation that anyone listening to this program might actually have. We will give or apply for CLE credit for Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin only for this program. However, to get that credit, you will need to have correctly and timely registered, fully participate in the online event, including completion of the survey at the end of this event. We will send certificates as soon as they are available. We will be trying to do that within 2 weeks. However, bear with us. For example, particularly Indiana, approvals might be a little slower. The first and perhaps fundamental question is what is ESI? And the federal rules define what ESI is. It's any document or electronically stored information which can be obtained directly or, if necessary, after translation by the responding party into a reasonably usable form. And what does this mean in practice? For ESI, it means electronic translation or manipulation before the item can be used as evidence. I have a couple pictures here that I think are interesting. The old way, illustrated by a monk transcribing a book, which worked for hundreds of years and was the state of the art. And then the recent rapid advancement on the right. This is a picture of an Intel Core i7 processor. It's Intel's latest processor. The size of that device is roughly the size of a U.S. quarter. And on that device are approximately 2.27 billion transistors. So we have indeed come a long way. The more basics, your ESI team. You're not alone in the ESI world, and you shouldn't attempt to approach an ESI problem, especially the first time, on your own. It's very difficult to solve ESI problems by yourself. You are going to need help from certainly your client. You will probably need help from an outside vendor to some degree. And a little surprisingly, and maybe more than any other area of pretrial discovery, you're also going to need help from your opponent. There's a big emphasis in the ESI area on cooperation and transparency with the other side and resolving ESI issues. So what you will find as you go down the ESI path is that many ESI problems can most easily be resolved with a cooperative and transparent approach to resolving them with the other side and involving the court if necessary to make sure everyone's aligned before advancing down an ESI road. What do we mean by translation into a reasonably usable form? Everyone understands paper. No translation is required. The document says what it says, but electronic media is not like that. For example, if you go to a disk drive and you go down and with a microscope and try to see what's really on that disk, you're not going to find words and letters. What you're going to find are areas of opposing magnetization, north and south or south and north, that as you move a magnetic coil across it generates a wiggly electronic signal like a phonograph record player moving across a record. And if you go down and look what that signal looks like, it's absolute gibberish. It's incomprehensible to any ordinary human comprehension, and that signal takes tremendous processing and sophisticated algorithms on the part of the computer in order to be converted into something that people can actually see. So computers are engaging in significant processing of electronically stored information to make it usable. And in discovery, you're trying to do the same thing. You're trying to take that electronically stored information and make it usable in your case. The basic vocabulary. The first basic vocabulary that we're going to talk about today is the vocabulary of volume. In most discovery problems, the main point of interest is how much. How much paper do I have? And in the ESI world, how much ESI do I have? Because how much drives so much of the decision-making around how a discovery is going to be approached. If you can't determine how much you have, you can't determine how much it's going to cost to review it, how much it's going to cost to process it, or how long it will take. And these are all important parameters for the client and for negotiating a schedule with the other side in the court, and for understanding how much you're going to spend and whether the spend on the problem is worth the value of the case. You need a vocabulary for quantifying the ESI problem. And the basic vocabulary for computers and volume in computers is the bit and the byte. Binary logic is the way computers think. Ones or zeros, on or off, high or low. In that Intel i7 core processor we saw earlier, there's billions of transistors. Each one of those can represent a logic state of a 1 or a 0. That's how computers think, using on or off devices. And stringing ones and zeros together is how computers can then process and store information. But one bit is not enough to make up an alphabet, so we can conveniently group 8 bits together. We'll call that a byte. And with 8 bits, you can form up to 256 unique combinations of ones and zeros, and that's enough combinations to represent all the characters in the alphabet, upper and lower case, all the numbers 0 to 9, and still have a bunch left over for punctuation, symbols, or other special characters, enough to make a respectable keyboard. So a byte becomes the basic unit of information that we're going to think about when we talk about how much ESI we have. A little more jargon before we get too far. TIFF image is a language that's thrown around a lot in the ESI world. TIFF image, all that means is tagged image file format. You can think of a TIFF image as sort of a digital photocopy or a picture of a page. One TIFF image might typically equal 1 page in the paper world. The advantage of this particular format, it's recognized and widely used by a lot of available image manipulation and management systems that are familiar to lawyers. Converting a native electronic file to a series of TIFF images fixes the information into a traditional page reviewable format, something that can be printed, that you can put an exhibit sticker on, and that you know will not change. OCR, another word is thrown around a lot. All it means is optical character recognition. It's the technique of looking at an image, like a TIFF image, and extracting from that image with software the words, converting them to a machine-readable, word-searchable text that can be associated with that particular image. OCR doesn't work perfectly, however. The better the image, the better the performance. But beware, OCR doesn't perfectly convert images into text. It imperfectly converts them to text. So it's not typically as good as having the original text file. USB means Universal Serial Bus. Everyone's heard of this. Look at any laptop, any desktop computer. Most phones have a USB port on them. All it is a standard way to interface between computer devices, and it allows high-speed communication between those devices. Everyone's seen a thumb drive or a sometimes called a flash drive. These things will typically plug directly into a computer with a USB port. This particular interface will allow speeds today easily up to 60 megabytes per second, and the standard is advancing all the time. Higher speeds are certainly possible. And as you'll see in a few minutes, 60 megabytes per second is a tremendous rate of information transfer. Now, in the non-ESI world, we had our vocabulary. We talked about how many boxes of documents, how many pages of documents. And we got, I have reproduced here an old estimating card from a copy vendor. We'd get cards like this so we could go to our client. We could measure how many feet of shelf space they had. We could estimate how many pages were going to have to be copied. And we knew, because our associates could read about 250 or 350 words per minute, we could take that and get a good handle on how many pages of copies you were going to have to make and how long it was going to take our people to go through them. That was the old world, but today more and more clients are moving towards all electronic documents. Today it's probably true in most businesses that all the important documents are kept electronically, and anymore it's becoming the rarity that anything of importance is being kept on paper. So we now have a different vocabulary, as you'll see. And so you get a different kind of estimating card from your vendor, and this is another one that's actually getting somewhat old because its estimate for the size of hard drives is very low for today's hard drives. But cards like this will give you an idea, if you have a certain amount of information stored electronically, approximately how many pages you can expect if that was all converted into TIFF images or equivalent pages. And you can see by the fact that things like 1 terabyte, 75 million images are even on this card, that the volume of available ESI is certainly very large. How large? Well, it's important as you evaluate your ESI project to understand the difference in prefixes and what people are talking about as they go up in volume. And this is a chart, the kind of chart that you can use for that comparison. And as you can see, it makes a huge difference whether you're talking about a byte, 1 character, a kilobyte, 1,000 characters, a megabyte, 1,000,000, a gigabyte, 1 billion, or a terabyte, 1 trillion characters. So as the numbers get thrown around, it's important to know which direction you're going on a chart like this in order to have some sense of the scale involved. Now this is a chart from 2009, and it said that the largest current hard drive was 1 terabyte. That's not even true anymore. In February of 2012, we went out and got a 3 terabyte hard drive for $169 from CDW. So these numbers are going up all the time. Here's another chart that is even older but gives some more anecdotal information. This is good for analogizing the amount of ESI that you have to things that lay people can wrap their minds around. I have my own personal favorite on this list. 1 terabyte is equivalent to about 50,000 trees that are made into paper and then printed. So if someone says they want to print out a 1 terabyte production, just think of a 50,000 tree forest being pulped into paper. Now, all these large numbers can give you some new frames of reference for thinking about information. 10 terabytes is roughly equivalent to all of the printed information in the Library of Congress. To be fair, this does not include video or audio. But 10 terabytes is a very large number indeed, and yet it is not uncommon in this day and age to find ESI productions that are capable of reaching the terabyte range. And that evokes another image, and that is the image of haystacks, very large haystacks. Sometimes I like to think about ESI collections in terms of a haystack or a haystack size, and these haystacks keep getting bigger. You can argue that this is a problem for your opponent, but it's also a problem for you because someone has to go through the haystack, and many people on this webinar might remember the movie Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is a movie by Paramount Pictures in 1981. I discuss this movie at the beginning of every case I work on, and my partners are now very tired of hearing about it. And for anyone that hasn't seen the movie, I'm now going to ruin it for you. But in the movie, Dr. Indiana Jones, the hero, is commissioned by the U.S. government to track down and wrest from the emerging Nazi darkness before World War II the Ark of the Covenant, which is a historically significant relic from biblical times that is rumored to also be the source of enormous and otherworldly power. After a series of action-packed and death-defying adventures, Dr. Jones succeeds and turns the Ark over to his government sponsors, who become strangely mute and cryptic about what they're actually doing with the Ark. Now, in the final scene of the movie, the priceless and mystical Ark of the Covenant is last seen being nailed into an anonymous, unmarked crate by an anonymous government clerk, where it is then wheeled into a giant anonymous warehouse full of tens of thousands of identical anonymous boxes. Think of that as the haystack. And now it is truly lost forever, and ESI can have that property. When the Ark of the Covenant is taken out of its native environment, nailed into an anonymous crate, and thrown into a giant pile, it can be very hard to find it again. And yet it is also true that just about every case comes down to about 20 critical documents. Different lawyers have a different number here, but no matter how big a haystack you start with, it's probably true you're really going to end up with only about 20 or so that actually mean anything. So part of the ESI challenge is managing the haystack so that when you're at the end of the ESI process, you can actually find the 20 critical documents and don't have just a haystack that is not of no value to anyone. Now it's time for our first poll question. The poll question will pop up on your computer screens. Please fill out the poll. Click the Submit button. This will help us track your attendance in the webinar for CLE credit. We will share the results of the poll in our frequently asked questions response, which we will be circulating approximately 2 weeks after the conclusion of this event. Once you've established a vocabulary and are able to assess how much ESI you have, the next thing you need to do is to go out and find the ESI, determine how big your haystack might be. And I've included this excerpt from The Untouchables, another Paramount picture from 1987. People that are familiar with this movie will recall that Eliot Ness started out having no success at all finding the liquor during Prohibition in Al Capone's Chicago until he falls in with Officer Malone, an Irish beat cop who knows everything and everyone. He forms an alliance with him, and one of the first things he does is he takes Eliot Ness, the intrepid government Treasury investigator, to the post office. And they have this sequence Well, here we are. LENS, what are we doing here? Malone, liquor raid. And LENS is looking at the post office, and he's looking at the police station, and he says incredulously, here? And Mr. Malone says, Mr. Ness, everybody knows where the booze is. The problem isn't finding it. The problem is who wants to cross Capone. And I hesitate to analogize too closely between liquor and ESI. But you need, in order to solve your ESI problems, you have to be able to define them. You have to be able to identify the ESI, and your client is the one who's going to be in the best position to help you find it. And you need to enlist their help to do a serious search for where that ESI might be. And where is it, and what does it look like? It looks like this. It's everywhere. For example, the first picture I have here is of a thumb drive or a flash drive. These devices can go up to 64 gigabytes per stick, and the number is climbing all the time. This particular one is a 4 gigabyte thumb drive. It'll hang off of a key ring. We consider this to be a promotional item of nominal value in our firm. And on the chart that we had earlier, 4 gigabytes works out to, if this device is full, up to 4 pickup trucks full of printed text. Some of these drives are small enough to be swallowed. Below that, there's a picture of a row of out-of-service desktop computers. Each one of those computers, in this particular case, it says several tens of gigabytes of storage on it. It could be a lot more for a newer computer. All of them are potentially relevant sources of information in a small business. They might have any number of machines like this in service, out of service, scattered about the operation. On the next picture is a row of cases of optical compact discs. Each of those cases that you see there holds about 320 discs. Each of those discs can hold anywhere from 10,000 to 75,000 pages of images. My estimate for this particular shelf is 240 million pages as TIFF images. And a blank DVD, one of them runs about 35 cents for a quantity purchase. Some more ESI you might find in a client, even a small client. Network attached storage. This is the server, the shared file space. What you see there is a picture of a network attached server rack. This happens to be from our firm. There's about 30 terabytes of storage in this rack. And it's not all storage. In fact, most of what you see there is not storage. It's power, data management, and switching. The actual drives themselves are only about a third of the equipment that you see there. Portable disk drive. These devices, up to 2 terabytes at the time this slide was made. It's actually 3 terabytes today. This particular device you see here, I believe, is a 1 terabyte drive. It was purchased for under $100. It can be powered directly from a USB cable, which means you can plug it right into a computer. It needs no separate power supply, and you can immediately load it up with a terabyte of information. You'll also, in a lot of enterprises, you'll find some sort of a recovery media, also called backups, archive, or offline media. What you see here is a picture of an AIT5 backup tape. This is an expiring format, but it's still very popular. This particular tape would hold 400 gigabytes of uncompressed data and transfers at 25 megabytes per second, so it's got a fairly fast, for its time, transfer rate. Popular format, a typical tape rotation and backup rotation using tapes like this might include daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual copies of everything that might be sitting out on a network, including the contents of a network-attached server rack, like you see up above on the page. And there's other sources of ESI as well. iPhone 4 holds 16 gigabytes of information. There can be email, text messages, music, videos, office files, browsing history, all stored on these phones and phones like it. And there's still other potential sources of information that might be relevant in a particular case: tablet PCs, automated test equipment, These are devices that run automated tests, for example, in labs. Security systems, badge in and badge out systems. It goes on, and then of course there's the ultimate ESI source, sometimes called the cloud. More and more data is being moved into the cloud, which is not really a cloud. It's storage that is remote from where the user of that storage is. It's managed by somebody else. And if you actually went to look and find it, you'd find it in a place like you see in the lower left. That's a picture of what's called a server farm. This one's in San Jose, California. You see for scale, there's a person standing there at the end of the aisle, and what you have are rows and rows and rows of racks of disk drives, just a massively scaled up version of what you saw about 2 slides before. So you can go through your client, and you'll find a lot of different potential sources of ESI. And then what do you do with it? There's a number of questions that need to be addressed. First and foremost is going to be preservation. Do you have a piece of ESI that something needs to be done to protect this ESI against possible loss? And in the paper world, we would say we'll issue a hold memo, we'll send our client a letter, we'll get them to acknowledge that they're not going to destroy anything that might be important to this particular case. But ESI has the property that the machine operation itself can put the ESI at risk, that the normal routine operations of the of data can result in the destruction of old information. And there's some examples there on the right, particularly things like automatic destruction or deletion of email that exceeds the size limit in the mailbox or that's older than a particular time. Employees leave, they leave their laptops behind, the laptops are erased and reused. These are all potential ways in which ESI that might be relevant to a particular case could be lost if care is not taken to prevent its loss. So after identifying what your sources of ESI are, you need to run against that source the question, do I need to do something to keep relevant information that might be on this particular item of ESI from being destroyed? The next decision that you need to make is whether or not to collect it. Is it okay to leave this ESI where it is, or am I going to need to pull it out of the client's environment? And the answer to that is going to depend to a certain extent on how central it is to the case, whether or not you're able to reach agreements with the other side on the scope of collection that's going to be required, and perhaps even whether or not it must be pulled out of its native environment in order to preserve it in answering the first question. Then you're going to have to decide out of that collection, what do I need to review? Is it possible to review less than all? Are there portions that require human review and it cannot be filtered? Is there some way in which I can electronically reduce the size of my haystack or my ESI collection so that I don't have to have 250 word per minute people look at 75 million pages of information? And then finally, once I've found the relevant and the responsive ESI, how do I mechanically get that information produced to my opponent, and vice versa, because many of these problems, in most cases, have an element of mutuality and reciprocity to them in the sense that you may believe that you have overwhelming issues regarding ESI, but the chances are excellent that your opponent, in most cases, is going to have many of the same problems. And so as you work through these issues, you will find, again, as we mentioned before, that the best source of teamwork might quite surprisingly turn out to be your opponent, because they will also be interested in addressing these issues in a mutually agreeable way. Fortunately, there are things that can be done to reduce the size of the ESI collection or reduce the elements that are required to be reviewed in a meaningful way. ESI is not randomly stored. Files on computers all have names, which includes the location of the file, plus a file name, plus an extension, and it has to be unique. So every document in a computer is uniquely identified, even if it has exactly the same content as some other file on the computer needs to be able to tell them apart. And there's an example of a file and path name there. The folder name is just a file name that contains other files. That can include more folders. For example, in the path name here, My Documents is a top-level folder. Personal is a folder below My Documents, or within the My Documents folder. Tax Returns is a folder within Personal. And 2002 final.pdf is the actual file in that path. You'll hear talk about the drive name or drive letter. This is just the logical name of a physical item of storage media. Typically, many people are familiar with C as being the main local drive on their desk or laptop computer. Other letters are usually used for either additional internal drives or network or shared drives. Now, the file name extension is that three-letter code that follows the file name, and that's what tells your computer what kind of file a particular file is. Some extensions are common and will be familiar to many people. For example, a .exe is an executable or a program file. These types of files are typically not interesting in most cases, and they tend to be quite large, and they can be eliminated from review by either manual inspection or tools that are designed to flag that kind of file and remove them from your ESI collection. .doc files from Microsoft Word. A .pst is a file that contains email items. So a mailbox will be stored as a .pst file and contain email. PDF for Adobe files. PPT for Microsoft PowerPoint, and XLS for Microsoft Excel spreadsheets. Now, the collection strategy is very important for your ESI effort, and the reason is because the collection strategy will tend to drive the cost. The more that's collected, the more that it needs to be reviewed. Deciding what the ESI to collect is effectively to decide the scope of your ESI project. There are two risks in the collection method. The risks are under collection, which is missing important ESI sources because you simply overlooked them or the client did not bring them to your attention. There's also the risk of over collection. You create such a large collection that it's not even practical, given the issues at stake in a particular case, to do a search of it. So it's important to try to calibrate the collection to the case, and this again is where cooperation with your opponent and understanding what's in the ESI that you're looking at is critical, so that you can make an informed, intelligent decision about what's going to be collected. Now, if you leave collection to others, you have higher risks of both under and over collection, particularly if you give the collection effort over entirely to the client. The client may not understand what it is that they have to turn over and may mistakenly under-collect, or if they are concerned about all of the responsibilities that you present to them in terms of turning over all of their evidence, they may, out of a superabundance of caution, over-collect and leave you with an ESI collection that suffers from being simply too large to be practically useful for your case. Vendor collections tend to make excellent and complete collections, assuming they have sufficient access to the client. However, they also tend to lead to very large collections. The vendors are sometimes will seek out as much ESI as they can reach within the instructions that they're given. And the vendor may not have a good understanding of what kinds of ESI might actually be important or relevant to the case. However, the use of a third-party vendor can be very useful for establishing a defensible chain of custody and can meet some of the highest possible standards for preserving evidence, since the vendor's collection tends to be a good one in terms of making sure that ESI copies are made appropriately. And then there's a guided collection strategy where the key custodians or key work areas are interviewed, data collections are reviewed before they're actually copied off by a lawyer who's familiar with the issues, with the client, with the request made by the opponent, and in that fashion with the client working with the lawyer and perhaps a vendor together, the relevant responsive files are then forensically copied or accurately copied for further processing. This has a higher initial cost because of the effort involved by bringing in the lawyer and possibly a vendor at the same time, but has the highest potential to reduce costs perhaps downstream if the right collections are made at the beginning. The good news and bad news. Most of the ESI collection that is going to be done is probably truly haystack material. The bad news is there's a lot of it. Many files have no evidentiary value. If you take a new laptop configured for a typical collection of ordinary office applications, it's going to have several, maybe tens of gigabytes of data if you just look at how much information is on the disk, but it's going to be entirely system data. There's going to be little or no useful information on that brand new laptop. No real user information has been stored on it, yet it will appear to be quite a large collection. Also, ESI tends to contain a large amount of duplication and near duplication. Computer files by their nature tend to be highly duplicative because they're machine generated and the machines are designed not to lose information. There tend to be lots of copies, backup copies, archival copies, temporary save copies, temporary files. Some users will save iteratively near duplicate versions of the same file so that there's 6 or 7 or 8 revisions, and because storage is relatively large in the computer and the cost of saving it is relatively tiny, those near duplicate copies tend to stack up. So you get large numbers of the same document that are very similar to each other, but without tools to distinguish them, it may not be apparent how much duplication there is at a first-order inspection. But these phenomena of lots of the information in files on computers tend to have no value, and lots of the files tend to be highly duplicated or nearly duplicated, do present tremendous opportunities for reducing the size of the haystack. Another concept is metadata. A lot of people have heard about metadata but may only dimly understand what it really is. And all metadata is, it's electronically stored information about the electronically stored information. Computers have to keep track of lots of information about files so that the system, when it's told to go find file X, can find it, open it with the right application, present it to the user appropriately. The metadata is information about things like who last accessed the file, what user last looked at it, when was it last changed, who created the file, what computer it was created on. All this information is tracked and usually available in most applications that lawyers would be familiar with. Think of this information as information that's associated with, but it's not in the data itself. It's used by the computer to manage the file. If you just copy a file off of a computer without using a tool that will preserve the current state of the metadata for that file, you're going to get a copy of the file, but you're also going to get a new set of metadata to reflect the fact that it's now your copy and not the client's copy. And this has some interesting consequences. If the old metadata associated that file with the client's computer, now you've got a copy of it on your attorney laptop, and as far as the computer is concerned, that's now your file. It's got your metadata associated with it. It's been placed on your computer. It was last modified by you. It's dated for the date that you copied it off, and so on. So you really don't have the same file anymore. And this property of how the metadata changes as files are moved around can be quite maddening to lawyers that want to be able to just copy files off themselves. One way to think about metadata is the envelope and contents metaphor. If you print a letter off on the printer, what you see is the content of the letter. But the metadata envelope, which maybe you threw it away when you got it in the mail or if you didn't retain it, will show a lot more information about the letter. It's going to show when it was received, when it was sent, what the postage was, who it was addressed to, what the return address is, and so on. And metadata is to data what the envelope is to the letter. And for a number of reasons, you don't want to lose the metadata. And yet it has this property of every time you touch a file, it tends to change. And so there's a certain fear of doing something wrong with the metadata. And it occurred to me it's kind of like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. This is a principle in physics, which is famous and well known to physicists. And the idea is that you get, metadata is one of those things where just to observe it, you change it, and that's a property that will is very difficult and very frustrating for lawyers to try to absorb in the context of having to do an ESI collection, especially a small one where they don't have a lot of vendor support. There's one more kind of metadata that you need to be aware of, and that's the embedded metadata. This is data that's the application that keeps track of that may or may not be visible depending on how the application is viewed. And the best example of this is something like Microsoft Word track changes. If you turn on track changes in Microsoft Word, you can get a history of all the changes made to a document. It will generally show who made the change, what the change was. It will call them out in the document. PowerPoint, for example, also has a speaker notes view. When you just view a presentation, the slides just show. But this presentation, for example, if you viewed it in speaker notes format, you would also see all of my notes about each slide below the slides. This is information that's in the file, but may or may not be actually visible unless you turn certain switches on or off. The invisible part of this is that the information is always in the file. It's just a setting in the application as to whether you can see it or not. So that metadata is there, and it's something that you need to be aware of when you're doing your productions. Most production software will allow you to make selections about what kind of embedded metadata is going to be produced or visible or not. However, in a real-world environment, this is another area where cooperation and agreement with your opponent is the best way to deal with these issues so that there are no surprises down the road. And this brings us to our second poll question. Again, the question will appear in the pop-up window on your screen. Please provide your answer to the question, and we will provide you with the compiled results at the in the frequently asked question compilation that we are going to forward at the conclusion of the event. One of the good things about ESI is that because the information is all electronic, you can use software tools to process the ESI collection. And two of the most powerful tools that are available are deduplication and gathering tools. Now, the disadvantage here is that a lot of these, the best tools, are either very expensive or only available from license or through vendors' software platforms, and it can be very costly for a small proprietor or small shop to try to run these tools on a modest ESI collection, especially if the stakes are not sufficient to warrant using them. The good news is that very recently tools are starting to appear that are accessible to smaller practitioners, and we can't endorse or ratify those kinds of tools, that a web search will turn up a growing number of small-scale ESI tools that will apply these techniques. And again, the main ones are deduplication and gathering. Because every file is a unique combination of bits and bytes, you can run algorithms on that file that will generate a unique digital fingerprint that can identify the content of that file uniquely. That fingerprint is sometimes called a hash value or a checksum or some sort of a security code. And two files that have the same value are almost certainly identical even if they have different names. How certain depends on how strong the algorithm is. MD5 is a common one. It's not perfect. But it's good enough certainly for most legal applications. SHA2 is stronger than MD5 and has a higher guarantee of uniqueness. But either way, excuse me, these values can be run for the files in a collection, duplicates identified, and all gathered together or eliminated, so only one copy of any given file actually has to be reviewed. Software tools are also available that will locate near duplicates, that is files that are not identical but contain much of the same content, so that they are all then brought together so that they can all be looked at the same time and then sort of returned, if you will, to their original location once a single decision is made about those files. This is a feature that a lot of lawyers would like to have for a paper archive, but software makes it relatively straightforward to do this for an electronic one. There are also tools that can be used to gather together all email threads. Email has a tremendous amount of duplication in it. If you send an email to 5 different people, each of them will have that email in their inbox. You will have it in your sent box, and it may also appear in archives, backups. If it was forwarded, then additional content tacked on. There's another round of what's effectively the same string. There are software tools that will bring all those emails together in a single spot for review in a collection, and that can tremendously reduce the number of individual items that have to be reviewed. And there are filters that can be used to exclude irrelevant email items or irrelevant file types, sort of like a junk filter can be used to keep you from getting junk email in the first place. But all of these tools all tend to work best when the native file and the metadata associated with it are properly preserved and available to the tool. And even if you have a situation where you perhaps on the other side have agreed, we don't like this metadata, we don't like having to deal with it, if you have any amount of ESI at all and you want to use software tools on it, you're going to want to preserve the metadata, even if it's just for your own use, so that you can use these sorts of software processing aids to reduce the time involved in reviewing the haystack. There are additional filtering tools that can be used for sort of sight unseen removal of documents from the collection. You can apply date filtering in certain circumstances. It works best if the embedded date metadata is accurate, and it may not be. Date metadata is stamped by the computer. The computer's clock, if it was not set appropriately, may not contain the right date. And so you can't always count on this. Email date metadata tends to be more accurate, but is not perfect either. But in any event, in a large collection situation, filtering out documents based on the embedded date metadata is possible. And you can use workgroup or custodian filtering. This is analogous to limiting your collection to, in the first place, to the custodians or work areas of interest of the client, as opposed to adding everything that can be found, so to speak, to the ESI collection. You'll hear from time to time talk of what a forensic copy is. Forensic copies are to electronic discovery what photocopying is to paper. These are simply accurate reproductions of the electronic data for preservation, review, and subsequent processing that faithfully preserves the original data and metadata. Without the Heisenberg uncertainty problem, the metadata is preserved as it was in its original state. Sometimes these images are referred to as bit copies, bit image, or full image. And they can be done at any level, but frequently they may be done on an entire computer. The forensic part implies that the copy has a chain of custody that can be traced to the original media, and that forensic chain can be supported by testimony in court if necessary. Now, these copies can be made again at any level. They don't have to be made on the entire computer. If you know, for example, that your files of interest are in a certain location, you can just make your forensic copy of those particular files. A note about deleted files in computers and in computer systems. It's very easy to delete files electronically on the surface, but because computers are designed to not ever lose anything or to make it very hard to lose things really, it's very hard to make an electronic copy ever really go away. Most routine file deletion doesn't actually delete the file. Files are simply moved to a different folder. Most people will think of this as the trash or the deleted items box for future deletion. For example, in Outlook, even after a message is deleted, and then you delete the deleted items folder and delete it from there, those messages can still be recovered for a period of time that's controlled by a system setting using the menu option, which is appropriately called Recover Deleted Items. When the trash is emptied in a computer, the system will delete references to where that data is physically stored, but it's still going to be physically available on the disk, and special tools can be used to go onto the disk and pull those files off. Now, it is true that over time, new data might be written over the old stuff, but that can take a long time, and it might never happen, especially if you have a drive that's very large compared to its contents. Other ways that deleted files can remain available, backup tape is made by the business before a file is deleted by an individual user. The backup tape is still going to have a copy of the file. Unless everyone in an email chain deletes every copy of it, there's going to be a copy available. And again, if there's backup copies of the email servers, a copy of that email might be available from there. System restores and individual backup disks kept by individuals might keep a snapshot of all the files in the computer for a particular time the disk was created. And that can even include a local copy of all the individual's mail at the time. So despite a corporation's best efforts to enforce a retention policy on mail, there may very well be a local copy kept by an individual user that might contain additional information. And finally, if your client is talking to you about using special tools to erase files off the disk, you should caution them that if you try to thoroughly erase a file using software designed for that purpose, the use of those tools is itself detectable by analysis. So the effort to thoroughly scrub a disk so that no one can ever recover anything off of it is itself detectable. Another technical concept, slack space. This is the notion that disks are written in chunks. The chunks have a certain size. If the chunk of information written to the disk does not fill the entire sector, there's going to be information left over at the end. And if that's information left over from a previous file, it's still there and readable, again, with special tools, even though part of it may not be. And this is an area where in a forensic or investigation into deleted information, the forensic experts will be seeking this sort of information off of disks. Okay, you sized up your haystack. You need to produce it as evidence. What can you do? The federal rules give you some basic tools for handling ESI. And the emphasis in all of these rules is early. The first discovery conference, lawyers are expected to discuss their ESI issues and how they're going to produce it. They are required to disclose in your initial disclosures the electronically stored information and where it is. And you're supposed to address ESI issues in your initial scheduling order. And again, the thread through here is not so much on how to do it, because much of the how is left to the individual litigants, but on when. And the when is early and in a cooperative manner so that these ESI issues are resolved up front and there are no surprises. Now, a frequent concern is that the ESI costs and the cost of handling ESI will swamp the value of the case. The federal rules now take this explicitly into account. If information is not reasonably accessible, and the reason it's not reasonably accessible can be either the burden of recovering it. Think, for example, it can be very costly to try to recover slack space information, or just the pure cost. If that showing is made, the court may order that discovery, but only if the requesting party shows good cause, considering the limitations of Rule 26b2c, and specify conditions. And among the things that can be specified is cost shifting, and in making those determinations, the benefits of the case, it can be weighed against the amount in controversy, the resources of the parties, and the importance of the issues. You can always request the other party produce its ESI in native form. If there's no practical way to print ESI out as a TIFF image, you can ask it to be produced in some other form, and for example, in its original native format. And this frequently comes up in the context of Excel spreadsheets, which can be very difficult to handle as TIFF images. It's not unreasonable, if an Excel spreadsheet cannot conveniently be converted to an image, to ask for it in its native format, and the rules allow for that type of production if that's what's needed to make it reasonably usable. The EDRM website, the Electronic Discovery Reference Model, is a good source of information if you want to explore further in the electronic discovery world. And this is their main diagram for describing a sort of top-level view of the overall ESI production process. And what I note in this graph is that they start out on the left with a high volume of information, which declines over time, and the relevance of what's left tends to climb. But since each step in the ESI process can take time and money, the best way to reduce the overall burden and cost in an ESI production is to keep the amount of information on the left, the height of that left-hand triangle, as low as reasonably possible. Kershaw and Howey, Judge's Guide to Cost-Effective E-Discovery, is an excellent reference, and I've seen this paragraph cited in briefs, and they advocate for a very focused collection, initial collections that are focused on key issues, initial collections that are focused on where the information is likely to be found, which, if you think about it, is not that unlike the paper world, where if you go into General Motors, you do not get every document related to cars. You go to where the files are likely to be that are relevant to your particular case. There's no one correct search strategy in every situation. Different kinds of collections of data will lend themselves appropriately to very different review strategies. This brings us to poll question number 3. The question will pop up with the possible answers. If you could please select one of the answers and press submit, and we will be providing the summary of those answers in our frequently asked questions after the end of the program, hopefully within 2 weeks. The traditional strategy for finding information in a collection that's been pulled out for review is the linear search. But traditional linear search strategies, the look at everything strategy, just does not work very well on a very large relevance poor data set, which is a characteristic that a large collection of ESI can tend to have. And yet, in order to be able to say that someone has looked at everything, there is no choice but to start at the upper left corner of the clover field and examine every single one. But the cost of doing that is going to be tremendous. But there are options if you are faced with an ESI collection of this sort of size, and with some cooperation from the other side. Although most ESI collections are large, some ESI collections are going to have a hierarchical property, or at least parts of them will look like this. This is storage that is well organized in the sense that you can find what you're looking for fairly quickly if you just know enough about what's sought, for the relevant project name, a matter number, a particular file. It's fairly straightforward in this sorts of well-organized hierarchical storage to go to the file that you want and pull it off the shelf, and it would make no sense if you were in the paper world to go to a file room like this and pull every single file off, starting in the upper left-hand corner of the shelf, go through all of them looking for your relevant information. You would just go to the file that you wanted, pull it, and go through it, because that's the file that you want. It's well ordered. It's a regular, well kept collection. Not all ESI is like that. Some ESI is organized in what we would call flat storage, a large collection of unrelated items with no logical structure. The relevant file may or may not be in there somewhere, but there are a few indicators as to where it might be. In order to find the one thing that you're looking for in the paper model, you have no choice but to simply look at every single file in a linear, sequential way. In the ESI world, you do have some options, though. You can attempt keyword searching, for example. This is the simplest form of an electronic search or electronic search filter. Keyword searching has got attributes similar to the children's game Battleship, where you tell your opponent, or perhaps even in your own ESI, you might say, I'm looking for the keyword plaintiff, and then you find out whether you hit anything or not. And yet, if you don't know the size of the grid, how many other files might be close to plaintiff or related to that file, it can be very difficult in this model to determine whether or not you have a search that makes any sense or not. So there are more advanced forms of searching for large ESI collections. The keyword search we've just talked about. Boolean keyword searching would be a search where you combine terms and you use roots of words. You might even use proximity terms like Whoville or Horton within 5 of the word clover, or other combinations of operators that are logically designed to filter down and find relevant data. And these searches can be combined. Multiple searches can be run to improve on a simple keyword search. Another form of search that's somewhat similar that may perhaps be a little better is statistical ranked retrieval. This is a technique that will take a list of keywords. It will done in software. Software will weight the words using algorithms that assign a relative importance to each word based on what the algorithm can already see in the collection, and then it will return documents that have the highest score. It doesn't require the user to construct Boolean terms, but again, statistical ranked retrieval type searches are only as good as the construct of keywords, and the applicability of the statistical ranked retrieval engine to the kinds of documents that are being sought. And then most recently, and somewhat in vogue today, is machine and supervised learning algorithms. These are tools that generate search criteria based on a sample set using a search engine that reinforces search terms that yield documents that are determined to be good or relevant, and weakens terms that do not appear to yield relevant documents. It does require the careful selection of the initial documents that the machine or the algorithms are told are the relevant ones, and those become the what's called the training set, or the training documents that sort of teach the machine this is the kind of information that's responsible to find more documents like these, and then the results of those sequential searches are fed back to the engine, and eventually the entire ESI collection is reviewed and sorted into a responsive and non-responsive stack. All of these techniques have the property that it's likely that some relevant documents are going to be left behind. And so you need to understand, if you're going to use techniques like this, whether or not the particular search was any good or not. This is usually done by testing the document set and determining whether or not the set that was left behind contains a lot of responsive documents or not. And the way it's done is by taking a random sample of the documents not selected and determining how many relevant documents are in the selection that is randomly selected that are responsive, and that gives you an idea of how many more documents might have been left behind. But it has to be done very carefully, or the test will not be valid. How do you determine what a good search is? Searches have two properties that are of primary interest to attorneys. This is relative precision and its relative accuracy. 100% precise search means that the search that you employed found 100 documents and all of them are relevant. A 100% accurate or 100% recall means that you found 100 relevant documents and there are no documents in the collection that remain that are relevant. Your search is 50% accurate if you got 100 relevant documents and there are 100 documents that are still in the collection that your search didn't find. In document production, we like high precision, but for legal purposes, it's less important than getting a high rate of accuracy. Determining how good that search was, particularly accuracy, may be required to defend a search strategy that's used in court, especially if you filtered your documents electronically some way instead of using a look at everything linear review. So if you're going to go down this sort of path, again, it's probably important to raise this sort of issue and this need early and either get the court to approve of the strategy or get your opponent to agree that it's an appropriate strategy to use in your circumstance. Ultimately, you need to convert your ESI to a form that's useful in court. That typically will mean converting your documents into some sort of petrified page-oriented image. The most common file format for this is the TIFF image, literally a picture of a page. Those images can then be placed into and coded or processed and the attorney notes added in a document system like concordance, summation, or case logistics. Now again, these systems work best if you have two things with them. First, the metadata, which the systems that process the documents find very helpful for handling them, sorting them, and giving you some context for where the ESI originally came from. The other thing that you need to have in a lot of these systems is some sort of a searchable text file. If the original ESI was extracted appropriately, and most document processing systems will do this, it will also extract, along with the TIFF image of the document, it will extract the text that went with it in a searchable format. If you don't get that, then you need to run some sort of an optical character recognition package on the image so you can create a text file. However, that sort of a text file has the drawback that it's not going to be a perfect reflection of the actual text. For example, you'll find a lot of misspellings in it, words that are not recognized at all. And that will tend to degrade any effort to electronically search those files. The Joint ESI plan, this is that plan that you are encouraged and supposed to submit as part of your pretrial conference to the court. Ludwig B. Spandero is credited with the statement, "God is in the details." And again, there are a large number of technical details for ESI production that are easy to address before you've begun significant ESI effort, but are very costly to try to do later if you didn't do it that way to begin with, or if you have to redo it. Particular metadata. Again, this is always constantly changing. So if you did not extract it at the beginning and you have to go back and do it later, you may find that it's impossible to match up the original metadata with the documents that you earlier pulled. How documents are going to be produced, what kinds of embedded data is going to be provided or not provided, and how you're going to handle things like deduplication and search strategies. What documents do I have to preserve? Again, the federal rules do not give a lot of guidance on the details of all of this. It is left to the attorneys to work them out The best time to work them out is early in the case. Here's some resources for further reading. These are all excellent sources of information. EDRM.net, we have been talked about. The Sedona Conference has an excellent collection of papers and information on its website. The 7th Circuit Electronic Discovery Pilot Program has got webinars and other information and links to further information on ESI discovery. The leading case on hold memos and preservation obligations, the pension committee case, is a good case to review if you're interested in preservation obligations and how to satisfy those. The District of Delaware recently issued an order, a revised order for electronic discovery, which does go into some more detail, particularly regarding what categories of ESI need to be preserved specifically. The Southern District of New York has a proposed joint electronic discovery order, which is a good checklist of issues to cover, but does not provide a lot of detail about what you are supposed to do. But it does provide a good issues checklist. And if you're interested in some advanced theory on search tool effectiveness, the www.trek.nist.gov site has got a large collection of papers that study and discuss various strategies for machine text retrieval. Thank you very much for participating in our program today. In order to ensure that you get CLE credit, you will need to complete the online survey that follows. Again, we will try to provide the certificates within 2 weeks, along with answers or aggregated answers to frequently or commonly asked and answerable questions. You can send those to ESI101 at McAndrews-IP.com. Thanks again for your time, and on behalf of the subcommittee and McAndrews Held and Malloy, we thank you very much for your participation, and we hope that you found this event helpful.
Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude our webinar. You may now disconnect. Thank you.